Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. My name is Steve Fielding. All the stories are taken from my 3-volume series of books, The Hangman's Record, covering every execution in Great Britain and Ireland between 1868 and 1964. Copies of these and many of my other titles can be obtained through my website, stevefielding.com. If you enjoy the video, can you please press like and subscribe to the channel? And if you can spare £1 or £2 to help it to continue to grow by clicking the thanks button on the YouTube video or the link paypal.me/The Hangman's Record, that will be greatly appreciated. And, as always, use the comments below for your thoughts on the case, whether justice was seen to be done, and suggestions for future episodes in this series. The story in today's tale from the Hangman's Record begins in June 1958. Queen Elizabeth II is on the throne, Harold Macmillan is the Prime Minister, and Dwight D. Eisenhower is the 34th President of the USA. The year would also see Nikita Khrushchev become President of the Soviet Union, Charles de Gaulle the President of France, and the European Common Markets established. In football, it is the year of the Wanderers, with Wolverhampton winning the First Division title and Bolton the FA Cup, beating a patched-up Manchester United team decimated by the Munich air disaster on the 6th of February that year, which took the lives of over 20 passengers, including 8 of their players. Rock and roll is the most popular form of music, and the pop charts in England are dominated that summer by American acts like the Everly Brothers, Elvis Presley, Pat Boone and Perry Como, and with Connie Francis having the #1 record with Who's Sorry Now at the time of our story. 1958 saw the release of the first Carry On movie with Carry On Sergeant, and other films released that year include A Night to Remember, Vertigo and South Pacific, although the most popular genre is war film, with classics like Ice Cold and Alex, Sea of Sand, I Was Monty's Double and Carve Her Name with Pride all being released. In literature, Graham Greene's Our Man in Havana, Ian Fleming's Dr. No, Truman Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's and Brendan Behan's Borstal Boy are all published. Popular TV shows in the UK include Blue Peter, Hancock's Half Hour, Grandstand and The Black and White Minstrel Show. That summer saw the opening of London's Gatwick Airport, the first parking meters appear in Westminster, and the opening of the first UK motorway with the Preston bypass stretch of the M6. And, in June, in the north of England, a young army deserter commits a brutal murder, leading him to a 9 o'clock walk with the hangman. Deserting from his unit at Catterick Military Hospital, Yorkshire, in the north of England, 20-year-old Private Brian Chandler of the Royal Army Medical Corps now needed money. It was Sunday, the 8th of June 1958, and slipping away from Catterick, he headed back north to his home on Talbot Street in the port of Middlesbrough on the River Tees, North Yorkshire. En route, Chandler, who was partway through his national service, reasoned that the military police would probably head straight for his hometown, so he instead alighted at Darlington. Here he was joined by his girlfriend, Marion Monroe, and her friend Pauline Blur, 2 teenagers who had both run away from home. The 3 spent the night in a caravan on the outskirts of Darlington with a soldier friend of Chandler's who was home on leave. On the following morning the soldier returned to his unit, and Chandler and the girls now discussed how they could obtain enough money to travel down to either London or Manchester. Marion told him of Martha Dodd, an 83-year-old woman she had once worked for, who she believed had money. Chandler decided it would be an easy target, and on Tuesday the 10th of June, the 3 of them visited Martha at her ground floor flat at 4 Victoria Road, Darlington. Marion asked Mrs. Dodd if there was any work available and was told to come back tomorrow and she might have something for them. They decided to return on the following day, only if they hadn't been able to obtain any money in the meantime. Later that same evening, Pauline's mother appeared and took her daughter home. When Chandler was unable to find a buyer for a bicycle he had stolen that afternoon, he decided that they would go ahead with their plan to rob the old lady. With her friend now gone, Marion began to worry about the implications of what she had agreed, and expressed her concerns that the old woman would recognise her and inform the police. She said later that Chandler had callously claimed if she did, he would kill her. On the following afternoon, they partied for a few hours as Marion had an appointment at the Labour Exchange. At 3:30, in the company of some friends, she met Chandler outside the Theatre Royal Cinema. He was smoking, and when Marion asked him if he'd found the money to buy the cigarettes, Chandler told her he had killed a woman. They could all see that Chandler had bloodstains on his shirt and trousers. Chandler and Marion spent Wednesday night at the home of Albert Hill, a friend, and in the meantime, the body of Martha Dodd was discovered by relatives. She had been brutally battered to death with 19 separate wounds having been inflicted on her head. The murder made the morning papers and mentioned that the police wished to speak to a young deserter. Albert Hill told Chandler that the police were looking for him and agreed to accompany him to the station. Chandler initially denied the crime, but left alone for several hours to ponder his fate, he summoned detectives to his cell. "I wish to get it off my chest," he told them. He then gave his account of what had happened that afternoon. I have been cautioned that I am not obliged to say anything unless I wish to do so, but whatever I do say will be taken down in writing and may be given in evidence. On Tuesday morning, the 10th of June, we went for a drink. We went for one in a pub near the station. We were talking about money, and the two girls wanted to go to London or Manchester or something like that. Then it was suggested by one of the girls to go to this lady, Mrs. Dodd's house, and see if we could get some work. On the night time, we went to the house, approximately 6:05, the three of us, and Marion went in and spoke to Mrs. Dodd. I stood with Pauline Blair, who was near the door next to Marion. Marion asked Mrs. Dodd if she could see her as she wanted to do some work for her. She said she was busy and her son was coming down later that night or something. She said, "Come back tomorrow at 2 o'clock, Wednesday 11th of June 1958. We left the Hills house at about 1 o'clock, 1:30, just Marion and I. Marion didn't want to go to Mrs. Dodd's house because she didn't think that £2 an hour was fair. So I said I would go down and see if Mrs. Dodd would give me some more money being a bloke. Marion said right-o, and she would meet us at the door office when I came back. So I went down to Mrs. Dodd on my own. Mrs. Dodd said she'd come in, so I went in and shut the door behind me and told her Marion couldn't come down to do the job for her. She asked why, and I made some excuse about her having to work for her mother and said I was willing to do anything for her, so she said I could dig her garden and told me to take some weeds out. I said it's all right and took my Mac and jacket off and put them in the hall, and she took me out to the gardening shed and I got the tools out. She was watching and said to me, "Have you got all you want, son?" And I said, "Yes, thanks, Mrs. Dodd." I took the rake and that into the garden and Mrs. Dodd went in and started to wash the dishes. I asked for a bucket to get the weeds out and she said there's one in the shed. I went in the shed and picked the bucket up and there happened to be a hammer in the bucket. I was walking back again towards the garden and I said, "Have you a better bucket than this, Mrs. Dodd? There's a hole in it." She said, "Yes, come in, pet." I went into the house and she went through the drawers to find something to patch up the bucket, some padding, and I was walking at the door again and she said, "How much do you want an hour?" I said, "Name your own price, Mrs. Dodd," and she said, £3 an hour, that's what the other gardener does it for. I said to her, "If that's all the gardener gets, you can dig your own garden, because I'm going." I put the bucket down with the hammer in near the kitchen door. She said she had never been so insulted in all her life, and she went mad. She picked the hammer up out of the bucket, and I thought she was mad. She came towards me and her glasses fell on the floor. You should have seen her eyes. She put her hand on my shirt and lifted the hammer and said, "You don't deserve to live for that." So I grabbed hold of the hammer. She was screaming at us and I had to hit her. She went on the floor and I must have hit her a few times. I don't know. I was frightened and I saw her on the floor. She was bleeding. I dropped the hammer on the floor, picked her head gently off the floor, and she was going to say something and her head rolled over. I talked to her for a quarter of an hour, but she was dead. I didn't know what to think, but I picked the hammer up and wiped my fingerprints off, but it was a waste of time, as they were all on the door handles where I came in and went out. I put it back on the floor. I put the garden tools back in the shed, got my coat on and that, and went out the back way. I didn't murder her. Her handbag was near the wireless. I opened it and there was £4 in, and I took that to get as far away as possible. Anyway, I went out and realised it was best for me not to go away. I was in two minds what to do. The newspaper this morning said she was a very friendly and kind old lady, loved by everyone. She was mad yesterday, crazy. I saw Marion, she was as scared as I was. We tried to laugh and carry on as normal, but couldn't. Tonight, Albert Hill came in and told us we were wanted down here, and we came down. Signed, Brian Chandler. Although Chandler claimed he'd only hit out to protect himself, the fact that the victim had received 19 heavy blows to the head convinced detectives that the story was far from the truth, and he was arrested and charged with capital murder, in the course or furtherance of theft. Chandler was remanded in Durham jail on the 13th of June, where he was kept under constant observation in the prison hospital. Ian Pickering, the senior medical officer, then made the following report on his mental condition. I have interviewed him at length, and as well as having seen him almost daily, except when I was on leave. I have also received reports on his behaviour from his Army commanding officer, his former schoolmaster, and the senior psychologist at the jail who has independently carried out certain psychological tests on Chandler. I have also read the police report on his antecedent history and the depositions taken at the Magistrates' Court. On the 16th of June 1958, I had a talk with his parents. Brian Chandler was born at Middlesbrough on the 31st of October 1937. He is an only child, and his father is a charge nurse at St Luke's Mental Hospital, Middlesbrough. He attended a secondary modern school and was said to have been a good average scholar. After finishing school at 15, he began as a messenger boy at the Imperial Chemical Industries in Billingham, where he worked for a few months. He was then apprenticed as a mechanic to Messrs W&T Avery at Middlesbrough, but after 2 years he failed his examinations, so he went to work as a labourer at the South Bank Brick Company, where he remained for about 7 months. In April of 1956, he was conscripted for national service and joined the RAMC, subsequently undertaking a 3-year engagement. He served in Cyprus between August 56 and February 57 and was last employed as a nursing orderly at Catterick Military Hospital. I have obtained no family history of any mental disorders, etc. Chandler himself sustained a fracture of his left wrist when high jumping at school, but he had no other notable accidents or illnesses. His parents say he has always been healthy, but inclined to be nervous and highly strung. I have, however, obtained no history suggesting any mental disturbance, epilepsy, etc. While under observation here, his conduct remained normal and rational throughout. He is of average intelligence, but he has, in some respects, a somewhat immature personality for his age. With regard to his state of mind at material time, the 11th of June last, Chandler has given me 2 different versions of his activities on that day. Nevertheless, I believe that he knew what he was doing and could tell whether he was doing wrong. In my opinion, Chandler is of sound mind and fully responsible for his actions. I have not detected any mental abnormality which might diminish his responsibility. He is fit to plead to the indictment and to stand his trial. When he stood in the dock at Durham Assizes before Mr Justice Ashworth on Tuesday the 28th of October, Rudolph Lyons QC prosecuting said that Chandler had plotted with 18-year-old Marion Smith Monroe and Pauline Blair, aged 17, both of Darlington, to rob Mrs Dodd, for whom Monroe had once worked. Lyons called a witness, Thomas Pearson, who told the court that about 2:45 on Wednesday 11th of June he was outside the Labour Exchange in Corporation Road, Darlington, where he met Marion Monroe and stood talking to her until his girlfriend came out and they all went to North Lodge Park. They stayed there for about 20 minutes and during that time he asked Marion for a cigarette. She said that she didn't have any, but she was meeting a lad outside the Regal Cinema who might have some. Pearson said they went at 3:30 to Northgate, Darlington to wait for a lad that Marion was going to meet. They stood for about 10 minutes when a tall young man came across a pedestrian crossing on the opposite side towards them. He had then approached Marion and she introduced him as Jeff. As they walked towards Banktop railway station, Jeff told Pearson that he was an absentee from the military hospital at Catterick Camp. When they got to the station, Jeff collected a small brown attaché case from the left luggage office and bought an evening paper. They then went to a house in Parkside, and as they made their way there, Jeff told Pearson that he had a clean shirt in the case and he wanted to change it with the one he had on. As soon as they got to the house in Parkside, Jeff asked the lady in the house if he could use the toilet and she said yes. He then went and took the case with him, and when he returned he had washed and changed his shirt and sponged his trousers. Other evidence was heard relating to the murder and the arrest of the prisoner. Despite having made a confession following his arrest, Chandler had pleaded not guilty. He said he had made the statement in which he killed Mrs. Dodd because Detective Sergeant Jasper Truelock was standing behind him, holding his arm and twisting his wrist, which he had fractured 5 years ago. Chandler claimed he had found Martha already dead when he had called at the house, and that Marion Munro, with a hammer in her hand, was standing over the body. Chandler said that when they decided on robbing Mrs. Dodd, he had no idea of killing her. When they went to the house the day before, Marion Munro came out and said she had been looking around for something to hit her with. Next day, Mrs. Dodd asked him if he would do some work in the garden, and when he came to the house, he found Marion Munro with a hammer in her hand and Mrs. Dodd dead. Marion grabbed Mrs. Dodd's handbag and took something. He had used no violence. Chandler said he told Marion not to take Mrs. Dodd's money because I was shocked at what she had done to Mrs. Dodd. Mr. Lyons asked the prisoner, "Were you making love with her?" Chandler said he would not call it making love, but he had kissed her. "You were prepared to kiss a woman that afternoon who, to your knowledge, had murdered a woman of 83 for a few pounds?" Lyons asked the prisoner. Marion Munro denied when cross-examined that she had accompanied Chandler to Mrs. Dodd's house and that she herself killed Mrs. Dodd with the hammer while Chandler was in the garden. Pauline Blair said on the day before the murder, she, Munro and Chandler talked about ways of raising money. Munro said she knew Mrs. Dodd had money because she used to work for her and decided if we couldn't get any money, we would knock her out with something. It was a general remark between us and Brian agreed with the plan, she said. Addressing the jury, Mr. Peter Stanley Price, leading for Chandler's defence, said they might consider Marion Munro a strapping young woman. There may be a number of young women around this country who would not be able to kill an old woman with a hammer like that, but it may be your impression of Munro that she would be able to do what she is said to have done. Chandler had said that the plan was that Marion and Pauline Blair would occupy Mrs. Dodd's attention while he broke open a drawer where some money was kept. Addressing the jury, Stanley Price said, "You may have laughed and thought it was funny if you saw a film a short time ago, I Was a Teenage Werewolf. But it comes rather near to reality when you have listened to Marion Munro and Pauline Blair and about their activities. It might have been a matter of being loud-mouthed, but these two young women in their teens talking seem to have been far ahead of Brian Chandler in bloodthirstiness." Mr. Justice Ashworth, summing up, said both girls admitted they were parties to a plan to rob Mrs. Dodd, and it may be you formed the view they contemplated death as a means of achieving their ends. That makes them accomplices, and you should approach their evidence with caution. The judge told the jury that if Munro was a murderess, no one had noticed any blood on her clothing. Some witnesses, Mr. Justice Ashworth continued, under questioning in the dock, started to argue and tried to evade them, but her answers throughout were simple and direct. I wasn't there. Were they the careful and ready answers of a witness telling lies, who was conscious that she had killed, or were they the short and truthful answers of a girl who had not been there and who was content simply to reply on that simple statement? As to consider their verdict, the jury took just 74 minutes to find Brian Chandler guilty of capital murder, believing he alone had deliberately carried out a brutal murder. Sentencing him to death, Mr. Justice Ashworth told the prisoner, "You have been convicted, and in my judgment rightly convicted, of capital murder in the most brutal circumstances." Once housed in the condemned cell at Durham Jail, Chandler decided to appeal, and the original date of execution was now shifted. Harry Allen, who had carried out the 2 previous executions at Durham since the passing of the Homicide Act, had been contacted and agreed to officiate. However, Chandler's appeal shifted the date of execution and now clashed with Allen being in Cyprus, where he was scheduled to carry out an execution, and the engagement was now offered to and accepted by Robert Leslie Jock Stewart. It was to be his second engagement as a chief executioner. The assistant was Tommy Conley from Wigan, who would be assisting at his second of just 4 executions. Chandler's appeal was heard in London on Monday the 1st of December and was to be the first headed by the newly appointed Lord Chief Justice Parker, who had taken over from Lord Goddard, who had retired at the end of September. The appeal was quickly dismissed, with the panel finding no reason to alter the verdict of the court. On the day before the execution, Marilyn Monroe's mother gave a newspaper interview and said that people were making life unbearable for her and her daughter. People point to us when we were out shopping in the market, and soon everybody was stirring. The worry has given Marion a skin complaint, Mrs. Monroe added. She's trying to get a job, but she has been frightened because of the way the other girls stir, and people seem to blame me because I am her mother. Chandler, a strapping 6-footer, was not expected to go to the gallows without a fight, and extra guards were placed on standby. Entering the condemned cell on the stroke of 9 o'clock on Wednesday the 17th of December, Hangman Stewart noted later in his diary that Chandler had his eyes tightly shut as he was led the few short paces to the drop. Seconds later, Brian Chandler, the 7th man to go to the gallows since the 1957 Homicide Act, and the last man hanged at Durham jail, was dead. Although Brian Chandler tried to put the blame on his 18-year-old girlfriend, there is little doubt that he alone was guilty of the brutal murder of the old lady. What caused the young deserter to commit such a violent murder was never fully explained. Although he had a number of small previous convictions, he came from a good family background and wasn't a hardened criminal. There is also no evidence of insanity, as recorded in the prison doctor's report. And although convicted killers after 1957 statistically stood a good chance of avoiding the gallows, the fact he rained almost a score of hammer blows on her head, the scene of crime photographs I have seen are horrific, clearly told against him. And finally, what is noticeable about the killers executed for murder during the course or furtherance of theft under the Homicide Act is that the haul, in pretty much every case, was a pittance. In this instance, the belief that the crime would bring the killer around £200 yielded instead just £4, a pitiful sum for the loss of 2 lives. You'll be watching another tale from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, thank you and goodbye.